Let's start with the ZTE phenomenon, because you are directly involved in this. You have sponsored legislation that actually would restrict the president's ability to make the deal he wants to make on ZTE. Could you explain to us what you object to in the president's approach, because he does penalize ZTE in his approach?
Well, first of all, this is a bipartisan effort. Senator Cotton, Senator Rubio, and many others on a bipartisan basis in the Senate believe we should keep the original penalties in place on ZTE. Those were appropriate penalties. Those were announced by the Secretary of Commerce, as you recall, back in April. And we've had lots of testimony before the Congress by leaders of the intelligence committees that ZTE poses a national security threat to the United States through their telecommunications network. On top of that, ZTE, of course, violated U.S. sanctions multiple times, flagrantly, tried to cover it up. So there's absolutely no reason to let them off the hook, which is why yesterday the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Bill, which has this provision in it.
And it has to be reconciled now with the House version, as I understand it. Are you confident, or how confident are you, that in fact your version will prevail?
Well, I'm confident because there's strong bipartisan support in the Senate. And when the House Appropriations Committee voted on this issue a number of weeks ago, a subcommittee unanimously voted to maintain the existing penalties on ZTE. I know the White House, wants this out, but I think there's very strong bipartisan support in the House and Senate for keeping it in.
And Senator, is this the beginning of a broader effort, a bipartisan effort, as you describe it, from the Congress to bring back some of the control over trade? Because trade is obviously a very big issue. We're watching the markets this morning are really reacting to U.S.-China trade situation. Is Congress going to take back some of the authority?
Well, I hope we will assert more authority here. In the United States Senate, I joined Senator Corker on a separate bill that would require the president to come to Congress when he tries to assert national security basis for example, imposing sanctions on, tariffs on Canada and our allies. I mean, I think people are really shaking their heads in confusion how the president can justify tariffs against Canada or European allies on these national security grounds. And so Senator Corker proposed a bill to deal with that. We had hoped to have a vote on his amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill. That did not happen, but there's still a lot of concern, as you say, here in the Senate about the president's, the way he's going about the tariffs. China and their theft of intellectual property is an issue that has to be dealt with. And so I think there's strong support for doing that. But going after our allies on national security grounds for tariffs is something that I think you're just going to see strong opposition to.
Senator, I want to move on and talk to you about the situation over immigration and the separation of families at the border. What's the compromise solution here? You've talked many times here and used the phrase bipartisan here. What is the ultimate compromise that can be reached to protect families?
Well, first, I think everybody realizes this now. I mean, the president could today, before we finish this conversation, reverse the order that he put in place 6 weeks ago. I mean, they put in place a deliberate policy of separating children from their families, which is why in the last 6 weeks you've seen this big spike of kids who've been taken from their families. So that's what the president needs to do. He needs to reverse his policy. There are lots of immigration issues that we can deal with here in the United States Senate. A few months ago, we had a bipartisan bill, right? Senator Graham and others put together a bipartisan bill. That was after the president asked everybody to. He said he wanted a bill of love. We put it together, and then the president and the Homeland Security Department pulled the rug out from under that bipartisan effort. So these are two separate issues. One is the president should immediately end what they began 6 weeks ago, which is this awful, cruel, deliberate policy of separating families from their kids. And there's a growing bipartisan outcry to get that done right away, to stop that policy.
Senator, politics is the art of compromise, of course. Would you be willing to support increased border security beyond what's been proposed as a trade-off to keep these kids together with their mothers?
So we need to keep the kids together with their mothers. I mean, this is crazy what's happening. I mean, this was 6 weeks ago. There's no security justification for breaking up these families, so you can keep the families together as they go through the asylum process. If you're asking me whether I support stronger border security as part of an overall immigration plan, yes. In fact, that's exactly what the bipartisan plan from a few months ago did. And that's why Senator Hollen, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republicans, Democrats joined up. That bill, of course, also dealt with the Dreamers. It provided them permanent legal status and ultimately a path to citizenship. So you have a bipartisan larger immigration bill in the United States Senate that the president opposed. But this policy of separating kids from their parents, they started it 6 weeks ago. It's outrageous. They should end it today.